A cold wind swept through a small Oregon diner as the door burst open. A man in a black hoodie stormed in, gripping a baseball bat, his voice slicing through the quiet. Behind the counter, a 20-year-old blonde waitress stood frozen beside her loyal German shepherd. In a sudden burst of anger, he swung, striking the counter, the dog and the young woman shielding him. Gasps filled the room. Outside, a Navy SEAL watched, and what he did next would change everything. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful tales of courage, kindness, and justice. The wind swept cold and steady through the pine-lined streets of Ash Creek, Montana, carrying with it the faint smell of coffee and rain. Inside, the only diner still open past midnight, a small brick building with flickering neon lights and a sign that read, Millie S. Place. The world moved slow. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress with a soft voice and kind eyes, moved between tables with the quiet rhythm of someone used to long nights. Her German shepherd, Duke, a calm and loyal companion, rested near the counter, always keeping an eye on her. He wore a faded collar with her name on the tag, and every so often she would reach down to give his ear a gentle scratch between orders. The diner was nearly empty except for 2 truckers finishing pie and a man sitting in the back corner nursing a cup of black coffee. The man was Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL on leave, broad-shouldered, quiet, and watchful, the kind of presence that could fill a room without saying a word. He sat with his back to the wall, always facing the door, his trained instincts never resting. The bell above the entrance chimed sharply, breaking the calm. A man stepped in, tall, wearing a black hoodie, his hands shoved deep into the pockets, the unmistakable weight of something heavy clinking faintly with each step. His name was Ray Mercer, a 33-year-old drifter known around town for trouble. He'd been seen hanging near bars, mouthing off to locals, always on the edge of being thrown out. Tonight, he wasn't mouthing off, he was looking for a fight. The air shifted when he entered, and even Duke lifted his head, sensing something off. Hannah forced a polite smile. "Evening," she said softly, handing him a menu. "Kitchen's open for another half hour." Ray didn't answer. He just stared at her, his jaw tight. When she turned to walk away, he spoke, his voice low but sharp. "You remember me, don't you?" She froze, glancing back. "You spilled coffee on me last week," he continued, stepping closer. "Didn't even say sorry." She blinked, remembering. He had come in drunk a few nights before, yelling about the jukebox not working. She had accidentally brushed his sleeve with a tray. She had apologized, but men like him didn't listen. "Sir," she said carefully, "I already said I was sorry about that. Why don't I get you a drink on the house, okay?" But he wasn't interested in drinks. He stepped closer, the smell of liquor heavy in the air. Duke stood now, his low growl rumbling softly. "Keep your mutt quiet," Ray snapped. Hannah's hand instinctively brushed Duke's collar. "He's not hurting anyone." Ray's lips curved into something like a smirk, but his eyes were hard. He reached under his hoodie and pulled out a wooden baseball bat, the grip wrapped in black tape. The sound of it scraping across the counter made every head turn. One of the truckers shifted nervously. "Hey, buddy," the older man said. "No need for that here." Ray didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Hannah. "You think you can talk to me like I'm nothing?" he said. "You think because people here like you, that makes you better?" "Please," Hannah said quietly, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for the phone near the register. "Just leave. There's no reason for this." The bat slammed down onto the counter with a loud crack, making her jump back. Duke barked sharply, stepping between them. "Tell your dog to move," Ray snarled, raising the bat again. "Don't," Hannah whispered. But it was too late. The bat swung. Duke lunged, pushing her out of the way, taking the hit on his shoulder. The sound was dull but powerful, echoing in the small diner. Hannah cried out, falling to her knees beside her dog. Ray took another step forward, his rage uncoiling. "Should have stayed quiet," he muttered. But before he could lift the bat again, a voice cut through the air. calm, steady, commanding. "Put it down." Ray froze for half a second, turning. Jack Hunter stood now, the chair behind him pushed back neatly. His expression was still, his stance balanced, the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of control. "Who the hell are you?" Ray barked. "Someone giving you one chance to walk out," Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. Ray laughed bitterly. "Oh, yeah? You gonna stop me?" Jack didn't move. He just stared. The silence that followed stretched long enough for the hum of the refrigerator to become the loudest sound in the room. Then Ray swung the bat toward him. Jack stepped forward once, quick, precise, and caught Ray's wrist before the swing finished. The motion was smooth, practiced, and the bat hit the floor harmlessly. Ray struggled, but Jack's grip didn't budge. "You're done," Jack said quietly. Duke barked once, as if agreeing. The truckers moved to help, one of them calling the sheriff on his cell. Within minutes, sirens could be heard outside, growing louder through the fog. When the deputies arrived, Ray was sitting at the counter, his hands flat on the surface, too shaken to resist. Jack stood nearby, calm as ever, while Hannah knelt beside Duke, whispering softly to him, her relief clear in her trembling voice. As they led Ray out, the cold air swept through the open door, carrying the sound of sirens into the night. The diner felt small again, the danger gone, but the memory lingering. Jack crouched beside the dog, meeting his watchful eyes. "Good boy," he said quietly. Hannah looked up, tears in her eyes, but a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "Don't thank me. He's the one who stood up first." She glanced at Duke, who rested his head against her knee, tail thumping faintly. "He always does," she said. Jack nodded, standing as the deputies escorted Ray to the waiting cruiser. The flashing lights painted the diner walls in red and blue, fading slowly as the car drove away into the fog. For the first time that night, Ash Creek was quiet again. The flashing lights outside faded into the night, leaving the diner bathed once again in the warm yellow glow of its overhead lamps. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, sat at the corner booth with Duke, her loyal German shepherd, lying quietly beside her. His eyes followed every sound, every movement, though he stayed calm, his trust in her unshaken. Sheriff Daniels, the 52-year-old officer with graying hair and a steady voice, stood by the counter, jotting notes into his pad. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, leaned against the doorway with his arms crossed, his presence quiet but grounding. Outside, the wind whistled softly against the windows, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of a train moving through the valley. The small Montana town of Ash Creek was peaceful again, at least for now. "You sure you don't need to go to the hospital?" the sheriff asked, glancing at Hannah. She shook her head. "We're okay, just shaken up." The sheriff looked down at Duke, who rested his head on Hannah's lap. "Brave dog you've got there." She smiled faintly, stroking the thick fur behind his ears. "He's been with me since I was 16. I think he keeps me out of more trouble than I realize." Jack's gaze lingered on the two of them, quiet admiration in his expression. He knew what loyalty looked like. He saw it in his own K9 every day. But this was different. This was the bond of ordinary life, the kind forged not through war, but through daily survival. When the sheriff finally left, the diner fell still. The truckers had gone, and the streets outside were empty. Hannah stood and began cleaning up the mess. Shattered cups, a tipped-over chair, a few spilled napkins that the wind had caught through the cracked door. Jack stepped in to help without a word, gathering broken glass into a bin. "You didn't have to stay," Hannah said softly. "Wasn't planning on leaving yet anyway," he replied. She glanced at him curiously. "You live around here?" "Cabin outside town," Jack said. "Came back a few months ago. Needed some quiet." "You and your dog?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Ranger, retired K9. He's home tonight." Hannah smiled faintly. "Two shepherds, then? Must be fate." He chuckled quietly, and for the first time that night, the tension in the room softened. But outside, a truck engine rumbled to life down the street. Both of them turned toward the window. The sound faded fast, maybe just a passing vehicle, but the look in Jack I.S.'s eyes said he didn't believe it. "You think he'll come back?" Hannah asked quietly. Jack paused. "Men like him don't let go easy." He felt humiliated. "He'll want to prove something." "Then what do I do?" she asked. "Keep doing what you always do," Jack said. "Show up, take care of yourself, and don't let fear take the lead. But if he shows again, you call me." He handed her a small card with his name and number scrawled neatly on it. The edges were worn, like it had been given to others before. "You do this a lot?" she asked, turning it over in her hand. "Sometimes trouble finds people who don't deserve it," he said simply. "And sometimes people like me are around to stop it." Over the next few days, life in Ash Creek seemed to return to normal. The diner reopened, and the regulars came back with smiles and nervous jokes about the incident. But beneath the chatter, Hannah felt the unease that came with knowing the man in the black hoodie was still out there. She found herself checking the door locks twice before closing and keeping Duke closer than ever. Every time the bell over the diner door rang, her chest tightened until she saw it was just another customer. Still, she smiled, served, and kept moving forward. Jack kept his quiet watch from a distance. He stopped by every few days, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to sit in his truck across the street at night. He told himself it was just to make sure she was safe, but there was something about the warmth of that little diner that reminded him what peace could look like, and how fragile it was. Ranger, his own German shepherd, sat beside him in the passenger seat, ears perked and eyes scanning the quiet street. "She's tougher than she looks," Jack muttered. Ranger gave a soft huff in response, as if agreeing. One evening, just as the last customers left, Hannah was closing up alone. Duke lay near the door, half asleep but alert, his ears twitching at every sound outside. The sky had turned violet with the last traces of daylight fading behind the mountains. She hummed softly as she wiped the counter, the sound of the clock ticking steady on the wall. Then came the sound she'd been dreading, the heavy thud of boots on pavement. Duke lifted his head instantly, growling low. The door rattled once, then again. Hannah froze. The lights flickered, the sign outside buzzing weakly. She looked toward the phone but didn't move. The third rattle came harder, followed by a voice, low, cold, and unmistakable. "You thought you could make a fool out of me?" It was Ray Mercer, the 33-year-old thug in the black hoodie, standing just outside the glass door, the same bat slung casually over his shoulder. Duke barked sharply, standing between her and the door. Hannah backed away slowly, her heart pounding. "Ray," she said, keeping her voice steady, "the police already warned you. You should leave." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Oh, I left, but not for long." The door handle rattled again. Duke barked louder now, teeth bared. That was when Hannah reached for her phone, hands trembling slightly. She hit one number, the one Jack had given her, and pressed it to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then a calm voice answered, "I'm on my way." The wind howled through the narrow streets of Ash Creek as the temperature dropped below freezing. Inside Millie's place, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly while Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, held the phone to her ear. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "He's here." On the other end, Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, was already moving. He didn't ask questions. "Stay where you are," he said calmly. "Don't open the door for anyone." Then the line went dead, and his truck's engine roared to life, tires crunching against the frost-covered road. Ranger, his German Shepherd K9, lifted his head from the passenger seat, alert. "Let's go, buddy," Jack muttered. Snowflakes drifted through the air as he sped through the quiet town, headlights slicing through the mist. At the diner, Ray Mercer, the 33-year-old thug in a black hoodie, slammed his shoulder against the locked door, the bat in his hand tapping against the glass with each hit. "You gonna hide behind that dog forever?" he sneered. Duke, the German shepherd owned by Hannah, barked furiously from behind the counter, his deep growl echoing through the empty diner. Hannah stood by the register, trying to steady her hands as she dialed 911 with her free hand, but Ray's voice drowned out her words. "You think that soldier can protect you now? He ain't here." The bat struck the glass again, once, twice, until the sound of cracking filled the air. Duke barked louder, his stance firm between her and the door. "Stay back, Duke," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the loyal dog didn't move. His tail was low, his body steady. Ray finally kicked the door open, shards of glass scattering across the floor. He stepped inside, grinning beneath the hood, his breath visible in the cold air. "We're not done," he said darkly. Duke lunged forward with a bark that made the room shake, but Ray swung the bat downward, catching the edge of a table instead. The crash was deafening. Hannah screamed, grabbing Duke by the collar and pulling him back toward the counter. "Leave us alone!" she cried. But Ray was already circling the tables, his voice mocking. "You think this town cares about you? They'll forget you tomorrow." His eyes flicked toward the dog. "But this mutt? They'll remember him." He lifted the bat again. That was when the bell above the broken door gave a faint ring, a sound almost lost in the chaos. Ray turned, frowning. The wind swept in first, then the slow, steady sound of boots on tile. Jack Hunter stood in the doorway, his coat unbuttoned, his expression unreadable. The air seemed to still around him. "Put the bat down," Jack said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. Ray smirked. "What are you, her bodyguard?" Jack took one step forward, his gaze steady. "No, just someone who doesn't like seeing cowards swing bats at women and dogs." Ray snorted. "Big talk for someone who showed up late." "You'll wish I hadn't shown up at all," Jack replied. Ray swung the bat toward him in one wide arc, but Jack moved before the swing could land. He stepped aside, grabbed Ray's wrist, and twisted it until the bat clattered onto the floor. The thug stumbled, trying to recover, but Jack didn't give him a chance. One quick movement sent Ray sprawling backward into a booth, the bat now far from reach. Duke barked once, as if giving approval. Hannah stood frozen near the counter, her hand still clutching the phone. Jack turned his head slightly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded shakily. "I think so." Ray groaned, pulling himself upright, his expression twisted with rage. "You don't scare me," he hissed. Jack met his glare. "Then you're not paying attention." The tension broke when Ray lunged again, but this time Jack caught him by the front of his hoodie, pushing him back against the wall. The thud echoed across the diner. "You need to stop," Jack said evenly, his tone calm but final. "Walk away while you still can." Ray tried to shove him, but the attempt only made Jack's grip tighten. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Ray spat. Jack released him suddenly, letting him stumble forward. "No," he said. "I've just seen what happens to men like you when nobody stops them." Ray backed toward the door, breathing hard, his eyes darting between Jack, Hannah, and Duke. The bat lay near the counter, and for a second he looked like he might go for it again. But then the distant sound of sirens echoed through the night. He froze. Jack's gaze didn't move. "Time to go," he said quietly. Ray glared one last time, muttered something under his breath, and turned to run out the door. The cold wind rushed in behind him, carrying the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sirens grew closer until the red and blue lights painted the frosted windows. Hannah exhaled slowly, her shoulders trembling, as she sank to her knees beside Duke. "It's over," she whispered, rubbing the fur along his neck. Jack crouched beside them, his tone soft now. "He's a good dog. You raised him well." Hannah smiled faintly through her exhaustion. "He saved me first." Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "He knew who needed him." Outside, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, tires crunching over snow. The danger had passed, but something else lingered, a quiet understanding between three souls who had crossed paths in the middle of a storm and found something stronger than fear, loyalty. The sirens faded into the night as the deputies drove away with Ray Mercer, the 33-year-old thug in the black hoodie, cuffed and silent in the back seat. Millie's place was quiet again, though pieces of broken glass still glimmered on the floor like fallen frost. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, sat on one of the booths with Duke, her loyal German shepherd, leaning gently against her leg. The dog's breathing had steadied, his eyes calm now, though he didn't move far from her side. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, stood near the doorway, his hands tucked in his coat pockets, watching as the last patrol car turned the corner and disappeared into the fog. The diner felt different now, emptier, maybe, but also safe again, at least for the moment. "You did good tonight," Jack said softly, turning toward Hannah. She looked up from Duke, a faint smile touching her lips. "I didn't feel like it," she admitted. "If you hadn't come when you did—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down. Jack shook his head. "You handled yourself better than most would. And him?" He nodded toward Duke. "That's one brave dog." Hannah's eyes softened. "He's been with me since high school," she said. "My dad found him as a pup after a storm. He's the reason I never feel alone." She smiled faintly, running her hand along Duke's back. "Guess he proved his point tonight." Jack nodded, his tone warm. "Yeah, he's got more courage than most people I know." The wind outside pressed against the glass windows, and the hum of the diner's refrigerator filled the silence. Hannah stood slowly and walked to the counter, where the remains of the broken door let in a faint draft. Jack followed her, glancing at the shattered frame. "I can fix this for you tomorrow," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "You've done enough." "I insist," he said. "Besides, keeps me busy." The next morning, a thin layer of frost covered the diner's windows, but the coffee was already brewing by the time Jack showed up. He wore a gray flannel jacket and carried a small toolbox in one hand. Hannah was behind the counter, pouring a cup for a local mailman, her hair pulled back neatly. Duke lay beside the door, his head resting on his paws, keeping quiet watch as usual. When Jack stepped inside, the bell chimed gently, and Duke's ears perked up before his tail gave a single wag. "Morning," Jack said. "You weren't kidding," Hannah said, smiling. "Guess I owe you breakfast now." "I'll take that deal," he said lightly, setting the toolbox on the counter. He worked quietly while she cooked, the two falling into an easy rhythm. By the time the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, the new doorframe was already fitted in place. As they ate, the town slowly came alive outside. Cars passed, kids headed to school, and the world seemed to return to its normal pace. Yet, beneath the calm, both knew that normal wasn't tea guaranteed, not after the kind of night they just lived through. Hannah watched the steam curl from her mug and said softly, "Do you think he'll be back?" Jack met her eyes. "Not for a while. He'll have to face charges now, and next time he won't find you alone." His tone was steady, reassuring. Duke looked up from beneath the table, as if understanding every word. "Still," Jack added, "I think I'll check in now and then, just in case." "You'd do that?" she asked. He nodded once. "Let's call it insurance." Over the following week, life found a rhythm again. The diner filled with regulars, conversations about the weather and football, replacing the whispers about the attack. Hannah's laughter returned, soft but genuine. And Duke was always nearby, earning extra bacon strips from grateful customers who had heard what he'd done. Jack stopped by most evenings, sometimes with Ranger, his own retired K9. The two dogs got along instantly, lying side by side near the booth as the humans talked. Hannah noticed that Jack didn't smile often, but when he did, it was quiet and real. "You ever think of settling down here?" she asked one evening, leaning on the counter. Jack sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Maybe. Town like this, it's got peace you don't find in many places." He looked around the diner, his gaze settling briefly on Duke, then back to her. People worth protecting, too. Winter deepened over Ash Creek, painting the mountains white and the nights long, but the diner stayed warm. One snowy evening, as Hannah wiped down the counter and Duke dozed by the heater, she noticed headlights outside. The truck stopped across the street, and for a brief moment her stomach tightened. But when the door opened, it wasn't Ray Mercer. It was Jack. He stepped in, brushing snow off his coat. "Door looks good," he said with a faint grin. "So does the coffee." Hannah laughed softly, pouring him a cup. "Guess we're both getting back to normal." Jack nodded, glancing toward Duke, whose tail thumped lazily. "Normal's not bad," he said. "Not when you've earned it." Outside, snowflakes drifted past the neon sign, and the town settled into another quiet night. Safe, calm, and at peace for now. In that little diner on the corner, 3 lives had crossed paths for a reason, and sometimes that was all the world needed to keep its light burning. The next few days in Ash Creek unfolded under skies the color of steel. The wind carried a bite that hinted at another snowstorm, and the small mountain town moved slower than usual. Inside Millie's place, the diner where everything had happened, life tried to resume its rhythm. The bell over the door still jingled when customers came in. Coffee still brewed in steady cycles, and the same old jukebox played its quiet country hum. But beneath the surface, a subtle unease lingered, a shadow that hadn't quite lifted. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, tried to pretend things were normal. She wiped down tables, smiled at customers, and refilled mugs with practiced grace, but her eyes often drifted toward the window. Outside, the snow had started to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing the town in silence. Duke, her German shepherd, lay near the counter, with his head resting on his paws, ever watchful. He never let her out of his sight now. When the door opened, his ears perked. When the wind rattled the glass, his gaze fixed on it until it passed. He'd changed, just like she had, more alert, more protective. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, stopped by once or twice a day. He always claimed it was just for coffee, but Hannah knew better. He checked the locks, watched the street, made small repairs around the diner that didn't need doing. Sometimes Ranger, his retired K9, came along, and the 2 dogs would sit together by the heater, quiet companions who seemed to understand more than words could say. "You don't have to keep doing this," Hannah said one afternoon, as Jack fixed a window latch that worked perfectly fine. "I told you," he said without looking up. "I'm not doing it because I have to." She smiled faintly. "Then why?" He straightened, turning toward her. "Because the world doesn't fix itself. Sometimes it just needs a hand." His tone was simple, but it lingered with her long after he left. That night the diner closed early. The streets were nearly empty, the sound of tires muffled by snow. Hannah walked home with Duke trotting beside her, his breath forming little clouds in the cold. Her small house sat at the edge of town, framed by pine trees that creaked in the wind. She locked the door, turned on the fireplace, and settled on the couch with Duke's head resting in her lap. The flames flickered across the walls, casting long shadows. For a while she let herself relax, feeling safe again. But just before she drifted to sleep, Duke lifted his head, ears pricked. His low growl vibrated against her leg. A sound came from outside, the crunch of footsteps in the snow, slow, measured. She froze, her heart skipping. Duke was already on his feet, standing between her and the window. The lights inside were dim enough that she could see faint movement beyond the glass. Someone walking along the edge of her yard. Then a faint knock, 3 times, sharp and deliberate. She whispered, "Stay." But Duke's tail was stiff, his body tense. The knock came again. She took her phone from the coffee table and dialed Jack's number with shaking hands. He picked up instantly. "It's me," she whispered. "Someone's outside." There was no hesitation in his response. "Keep the lights low. Stay inside. I'm on my way." Minutes later, his truck's headlights cut through the snow. He parked quietly down the road, stepping out without slamming the door. Ranger moved beside him, alert and silent. Jack scanned the yard, his eyes adjusting to the dim light spilling from Hannah's window. The figure was still there, a man standing near the porch, shoulders hunched against the cold. Even from a distance, Jack recognized the stance. Ray Mercer, the black hoodie, the same restless aggression in every movement. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered under his breath. He moved closer, his steps muffled by the snow. Inside, Hannah could see the shape outside growing sharper now. Ray's voice carried through the wind, rough and mocking. "You think you can ruin me, sweetheart? You think the cops scare me?" He took a slow step closer to the porch, his hand gripping something long, metallic, a bat. Duke's growl deepened. Hannah whispered, "Don't you dare," as she stepped back. Her hand hovered near the phone, but before she could speak again, a voice cut through the night from behind Ray. Calm, cold, and commanding. "Put it down, Ray." The thug turned, startled. Jack stood near the edge of the yard, his silhouette outlined by falling snow, steady and unmoving. "Didn't learn the first time?" Jack asked quietly. Ray laughed harshly. "You think you can stop me again? This isn't your fight, soldier." Jack took another step forward, his breath visible in the cold. "You made it mine when you brought that bat to a woman's home." For a moment the only sound was the wind. Then Ray lifted the bat, gripping it with both hands. "Last time you got lucky," he said. "Tonight you won't." Duke barked sharply from the doorway, ready to protect. Jack's expression didn't change. "Try me," he said. The next few seconds stretched thin as glass. Ray lunged forward, the bat slicing through the air. Jack sidestepped with practiced ease, grabbing Ray's arm and pulling him off balance. The bat fell into the snow with a dull thud. The two men struggled briefly, but Ray wasn't a fighter. He was angry, reckless, and already outmatched. Within moments, Jack had him pinned against the side of the porch, his voice low but fierce. "This ends tonight," he said. "You don't go near her or that dog ever again." Ray glared but didn't speak. Jack's tone stayed calm. "You understand?" A long silence. Then Ray gave a single nod, his breath shallow. Jack released him, stepping back. "Now go." Ray stumbled away, muttering under his breath, disappearing into the swirling snow. Jack watched until the darkness swallowed him, then turned toward the porch where Hannah stood, Duke by her side. "You okay?" he called softly. She nodded, voice trembling. "You got here fast?" Jack smiled faintly. "Didn't have far to go." Duke barked once, his tail wagging now that the tension had passed. The three stood there for a moment, snowflakes drifting around them like falling ash. The danger gone, but the bond between them stronger than ever. The next morning, Ash Creek woke to a cold so sharp it made every sound feel louder. The frost clung to rooftops and telephone lines, the world painted white under a pale sky. At Millie's place, the diner windows fogged from the warmth inside. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, poured coffee into chipped mugs for 2 regulars, her voice calm but quieter than usual. Duke, her German shepherd, lay by the door, his eyes tracking every movement outside. Since the night Ray Mercer, the 33-year-old thug in the black hoodie, had shown up at her house, the dog hadn't relaxed once. Every creak in the floorboards or hum from the fridge made his ears twitch. Hannah didn't blame him. She hadn't slept much either. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, walked in around 9, brushing snow off his shoulders. His expression was steady, though his eyes moved across the diner like he was scanning a perimeter. "Morning," he said, his voice low but warm. Hannah smiled faintly. "You're early." "Didn't sleep much," he replied, settling into his usual booth. She poured him coffee without asking. "Neither did I," she admitted quietly. Duke lifted his head, tail thumping once as Jack reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Still on guard?" he asked. "Always," she said softly. They talked little after that. The diner filled slowly with the usual crowd, truck drivers, loggers, a few retirees escaping the chill. But Hannah couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Once or twice she caught sight of a dark figure across the street, near the old hardware store. Each time she looked, the person seemed to move out of view. Jack noticed too. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. When the lunch rush ended, he stood and slid a few bills onto the counter. "Lock up early tonight," he said. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window. "Because he's not finished yet." That evening, as dusk settled over the mountains, Hannah closed the diner earlier than usual. The air outside smelled like pine and cold metal. Duke walked close beside her, his paws crunching through the snow. The street lamps buzzed softly, their light breaking against the mist. Halfway home, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, but saw only empty road and snow swirling in the wind. "It's okay," she murmured to Duke. "Just the wind." But the dog didn't relax. His ears stayed forward, his growl low. She walked faster, heart racing, until her small house came into view at the edge of the street. She had just reached for her keys when a voice came from the shadows near her porch. "Miss me?" It was Ray Mercer. The same black hoodie, the same cruel smirk. The bat rested across his shoulders as if he'd been waiting. Hannah froze. Duke stepped forward instantly, his stance protective. "Stay back," she said, trying to sound firm. Ray tilted his head. "You called the cops, didn't you?" "Thought that'd fix everything." He stepped closer, tapping the bat against his palm. "You embarrassed me. Made me look weak. You think I'll let that slide?" Duke growled louder, his body between them. Ray laughed. "Oh, the mud again. Should have finished that job last time." He swung the bat downward suddenly, not at Hannah, but near Duke, the impact echoing off the porch rail. Duke barked fiercely, lunging forward, but Hannah grabbed his collar. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't." Ray's grin widened. "You really think that dog can protect you forever?" He swung again, this time hitting a flower pot that shattered at Hannah's feet. She stumbled back, gripping Duke tighter. "Leave us alone," she shouted, but Ray only laughed. "You want me to stop?" he said. "Make me." Before she could respond, Duke barked sharply, once, twice, and then the sound of a truck engine cut through the tension. Headlights swept across the street. Ray turned his head, squinting against the glare. The truck stopped at the curb, door opening with a soft creak. Jack Hunter stepped out, the cold catching his breath in the air. "Step away from her," he said evenly. Ray straightened, gripping the bat tighter. "You again?" "You keep showing up where you shouldn't," Jack replied, walking closer. "This time, you're not walking away." Ray's tone turned mocking. "What are you going to do, soldier boy? Arrest me? You don't even wear a badge." Jack stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but deadly quiet. "No badge, just conviction." For a long moment neither moved. The street was silent except for the faint hiss of snow. Then Ray lifted the bat and swung. Jack moved before the arc finished, sidestepping easily and catching Ray's wrist mid-swing. The bat clattered to the ground. Ray tried to recover, but Jack's hand caught his shoulder, pulling him off balance. "That's enough," Jack said, his tone still level but carrying weight. Ray tried to shove him, but Jack didn't budge. "You've had your fun," he said. "Now you stop, before someone gets hurt." Ray's chest heaved, his eyes darting between Jack and Duke. "You can't watch her forever," he said. "Maybe not," Jack replied, "but she won't be alone anymore." Something in his tone, final, unwavering, made Ray hesitate. He stepped back slowly, the fight leaving his posture. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yeah, it is," Jack said firmly. Ray glared one last time, then turned and walked down the street, his figure fading into the snowy dark. For a long moment the world was quiet again. Hannah sank to her knees beside Duke, her hands shaking as she held him close. Jack crouched beside them, his voice gentle now. "You did good," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes wide but steady. "You keep saying that," she whispered. "Maybe one day I'll believe it." Jack smiled faintly. "You will." Duke licked her hand once, his tail giving a single slow wag as the wind carried the last trace of Ray Mercer away into the night. For 2 days, the snow in Ash Creek fell without pause, softening the edges of the town, until everything looked still and clean again. But beneath that quiet white blanket, unease simmered. The locals whispered about Ray Mercer, the 33-year-old thug in the black hoodie. Some said he'd skipped town after the last confrontation. Others said he'd been spotted by the Old Mill Road watching from the tree line. The sheriff's deputies hadn't found him yet, but Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, didn't need a report to know the truth. He wasn't done. People like Ray didn't just disappear. They waited. Inside Millie's place, Hannah tried to keep her mind busy. The diner hummed with low conversation and clinking silverware. Duke, her German shepherd, lay near her feet behind the counter, his presence grounding her more than words ever could. He lifted his head whenever the bell above the door jingled, his instincts sharp even when he seemed calm. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, came by again that afternoon. He looked more rested this time, though his tone stayed measured, always assessing. "Any word from the sheriff?" he asked quietly as Hannah poured him coffee. She shook her head. "They said he's probably gone, but I don't believe that." "Neither do I," Jack said. He sipped the coffee slowly, his eyes on the snowy street outside. He's watching, waiting for a moment when you're alone again. That night, as the last customers left, Hannah stacked chairs onto tables while the jukebox played its final song. The sound of Duke S. tail thumping against the counter was the only thing that broke the silence. Outside, the snowstorm had eased, leaving a world washed in silver light. She locked the front door, turned the open sign to closed, and knelt beside Duke. "Almost home, boy," she whispered, rubbing the soft fur behind his ears. He gave a low, content rumble. But before she could stand, the lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The diner plunged into darkness. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, the creak of the back door. Hannah's pulse spiked. She reached for her phone, but the screen was dark, no signal. Duke was already on alert, body tense, ears forward. A shape moved in the shadows near the kitchen, too tall and deliberate to be the wind. The metallic scrape of a bat echoed softly against tile. "You miss me?" The voice came from the back, mocking, slow. Ray Mercer stepped into view, his black hoodie damp from the snow, the bat hanging loosely in his grip. "You thought you could call the cops and hide behind that soldier? Should have known better." Hannah backed toward the counter, keeping herself between him and Duke. "You need to leave," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Ray grinned. "I don't take orders from waitresses." Duke barked sharply, the sound breaking through the dark. Ray flinched, then laughed. "Oh, you brought your little guard dog. Let's see how tough he really is." Before she could react, he swung the bat toward a table, sending it crashing to the floor. The noise startled Duke, but the dog didn't back down. He moved in front of Hannah, his growl deep and controlled. "Back up, Ray," she warned. "You don't want to do this," he sneered. "Oh, I do." He stepped closer, raising the bat again, not for the furniture this time, but toward Duke. Hannah shouted, "No!" as Duke lunged forward, knocking into Ray's arm and sending the swing wide. The bat hit the wall, and the sound echoed like thunder. The chaos lasted only seconds, but it was enough to draw attention. Outside, Jack was halfway down Main Street when he saw the diner lights flicker through the snow. Then he heard it, the unmistakable crash of wood and metal. He didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he parked, grabbed his flashlight, and ran toward the sound. The moment he reached the door, he saw the outline of movement through the glass. Hannah pressed back near the counter, Duke defending her, and Ray's shadow towering over them. Jack kicked the door open. "That's enough," he barked. Ray turned startled. "You again?" His tone wavered just enough to betray uncertainty. Jack stepped inside, his voice even but cutting. "You've had 2 chances to walk away. This is the last one." Ray smirked. "What are you going to do, hero? Arrest me?" "No," Jack said. "I'll just stop you." For a brief second, the room went utterly still. The only sound was Duke's low growl vibrating through the air. Then Ray charged. The swing came fast, but Jack was faster. He sidestepped, catching Ray's wrist mid-motion and twisting just enough to make the bat drop. It clattered against the tile. Ray tried to grab Jack's jacket, but the seal pushed him back with precision, not rage. Control honed over years of discipline. Ray stumbled into a booth, breath ragged. "You're done," Jack said. "Go home." But Ray wasn't listening. He lunged again, wild this time, shouting something Hannah couldn't make out. Duke leapt forward, intercepting him with a deep warning bark that filled the room. Ray froze, glaring between Jack and the dog. "You think you're safe because he's here?" he spat. "He can't protect you forever." Hannah straightened, her voice steady now. "No," she said, "but I can protect myself." Ray looked at her, surprised by the change in tone. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then, finally, he backed away. "You'll regret this," he muttered, before turning and slipping out into the night, his footsteps fading into the snow. Jack turned to Hannah, lowering his voice. "You okay?" She nodded shakily, her hand resting on Duke's head. "Yeah, thanks to you." Jack shook his head. "No, thanks to him." He looked at Duke, whose ears were still perked, gaze fixed on the door. "You've got one loyal protector." Hannah smiled faintly, her heart still racing. "We both do," she said. The diner was quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear that filled the silence. It was relief. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints Ray Mercer left behind, as if the night itself had decided to erase him. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the streets of Ash Creek glittering under a hard winter sun. The diner was quieter than usual, its regulars subdued, each whispering in low tones about what had happened the night before. Everyone had heard the noise, the shouting, the confrontation that ended with Ray Mercer running off into the snow. No one knew where he went, and that uncertainty hung over the town like a cloud. Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, kept her focus on her tasks, though her thoughts drifted constantly. She wiped the counter, poured coffee, and smiled where she could. But Duke, her loyal German shepherd, never strayed far from her side. He sat by the door, head high, eyes sharp. Even when he seemed relaxed, his posture betrayed the truth. He was still on watch. Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, stopped by again, as everyone expected he would. He didn't talk much. He didn't have to. He simply sat at his usual booth near the window, sipping black coffee and watching the world move outside. When Hannah passed by, he spoke quietly. "You holding up?" She nodded, setting down a fresh pot. "Trying to. It's just, every time someone walks in, I think it's him again." Jack studied her for a moment, then said, "That's natural. Fear doesn't go away right after it's earned." "Does it ever?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "when it's replaced by something stronger." She didn't ask what he meant, but the thought stayed with her long after he left. The afternoon faded into evening faster than usual. Clouds gathered again, dulling the last of the sunlight. Hannah locked the door early and walked home through the narrow side streets, her breath visible in the cold air. Duke trotted beside her, leash loose, head turning at every sound. When they reached her small house, the porch light flickered once before staying on. She stepped inside, locking both doors, and hung her coat on the hook by the wall. The quiet should have been comforting, but instead it pressed in around her like a weight. She poured a cup of tea and sank into the couch. Duke lay on the rug near her feet, tail flicking occasionally. She ran her fingers through his fur, the simple rhythm easing her thoughts. "We're okay now," she said softly. But even as the words left her lips, she wasn't sure she believed them. Duke's ears twitched, and his head lifted. A low growl built in his chest. She froze. "What is it?" she whispered. The growl deepened. Then came the sound, a distant thud from outside, like something metal hitting the ground. She stood, setting her cup aside. "Stay here," she murmured, though she knew Duke wouldn't. She moved toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. The street was empty, silent, blanketed in snow. But there, near the fence at the edge of her yard, a shape moved, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark clothing. Her breath caught. She stepped back quickly, heart pounding. "It's him," she whispered. Duke stood between her and the door now, body tense. A faint tapping began at the window, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then a voice, muffled by glass, but unmistakable. "You've been real brave, sweetheart. Let's see how long that lasts." Ray Mercer. Before she could react, Duke barked fiercely, his tail stiff, teeth bared. The knocking turned into pounding. "You think that dog can stop me?" Ray shouted from outside. "I'll finish what I started." Hannah grabbed her phone, but the screen showed no service. Her hand trembled as she whispered, "Jack." She couldn't call him, but he wasn't far. She darted to the back of the house and turned off the lights, every instinct telling her to stay hidden. But Duke wasn't having it. The dog stood by the door, waiting for her signal. When the sound of splintering wood cracked through the quiet, Hannah knew she didn't have a choice. Ray forced the front door open, snow blowing in behind him. He stepped into the living room, bat in hand, eyes wild. "Where are you?" he shouted. "Come out!" Duke barked again, leaping between the furniture, keeping himself between Ray and the kitchen where Hannah had moved. "There's your mutt," Ray sneered. "Guess we start with him." He raised the bat high, but before he could swing, Duke lunged, teeth snapping near the handle, forcing Ray to step back. The dog barked again, sharp and commanding, as if calling for help. And it worked. Outside, headlights cut through the storm. Jack's truck screeched to a stop. He'd heard Duke's bark before, recognized it instantly. In seconds, he was out of the vehicle and moving through the snow. "Hannah!" he called, his voice strong, carrying through the wind. From inside came the sound of shouting and furniture scraping. He moved faster, reaching the door and shoving it open with one powerful motion. The sight hit him immediately. Ray standing near the couch, bat raised again, Duke circling him, barking in fury. Hannah was behind the counter, frozen, trying to think of how to help without getting Duke hurt. Jack's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Drop it!" Ray spun, startled. "You again?" he snapped. "You just don't quit, do you?" "Not when someone's in danger," Jack said, stepping closer, calm but lethal. Ray laughed darkly. "This time, you won't stop me." "You're right," Jack said. "He will." He pointed to Duke, whose growl rose low and deep. Ray hesitated, then swung the bat toward Jack, but Jack was ready. He caught Ray's arm, forcing him backward with practiced strength. The bat slipped from Ray's hand, sliding across the floor. Duke barked once, advancing with purpose, his eyes locked on the intruder. "You're done," Jack said. "Get out." For a moment, Ray looked ready to argue. Then he saw the determination in both man and dog, the unshakable unity, and he faltered. With a muttered curse, he backed toward the door, shoulders hunched. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "It is," Jack replied, "because next time you won't make it past the road." Ray turned and fled into the cold, vanishing into the dark night. The silence that followed felt endless. Hannah sank to her knees beside Duke, holding him close. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack exhaled, steadying himself before kneeling beside them. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, tears of relief in her eyes. "We're okay," she said softly. "Thanks to you." Jack shook his head. "No, thanks to him." Duke wagged his tail once, leaning against her. Outside the wind eased, and the first light of dawn touched the snow, washing the night clean at last. The next few days unfolded in uneasy quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath. Snow melted into muddy slush along the curbs, and the diner reopened as though nothing had happened. But Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, still flinched every time the bell above the door rang. Duke, her German shepherd, sat faithfully behind the counter, watchful and calm, though the muscles in his back stayed tense. The sheriff had stopped by twice, asking for details, promising extra patrols near her home, but Hannah knew deep down that men like Ray Mercer did not stop because of laws. They stopped because someone made them. And for now, that someone seemed to be Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, who came by each morning for coffee and quiet company. Jack didn't talk much about what had happened, and neither did she. But his presence gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Every time he stepped through the door, Duke's tail would wag once before settling again. Jack would nod, take his usual seat near the window, and they would exchange small smiles that said more than words could. Still, under the surface, Hannah could sense something shifting. She saw it in Jack's eyes when he looked outside for too long, scanning the street like he was waiting for a storm, and she felt it in the air, the weight of something unfinished. That evening, the wind picked up again. The sky turned a bruised shade of gray as a fresh flurry began to fall. Hannah was closing up, humming softly as she wiped the counter. Duke was curled by the door, eyes half closed but alert. The last customer left with a wave, and the jingling bell faded into stillness. She switched off the neon sign and turned to grab her coat when she noticed it. A shape outside, just beyond the frosted glass. Still, watching, her breath caught. She turned off the last light, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. The shape moved closer, the outline of a hood becoming clearer through the snow. She reached down to touch Duke's collar. "Stay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Duke's ears pricked up, a soft growl rumbling from his chest. Then came the sound, the scrape of something against the window, metal. She froze. A heartbeat later, the front door rattled. Then again, then the unmistakable sound of a heavy thud. "Open up!" The voice was low, angry. "Ray Mercer. Thought you could hide behind that soldier forever?" he shouted. "He's not here now, is he?" Fear clawed at her throat, but she stayed where she was, backing slowly toward the phone on the counter. Before she could grab it, the door burst open with a violent crack. The bell above it clanged once and fell silent. Ray stepped inside, snow dripping from his black hoodie, a baseball bat resting on his shoulder. "Evening, sweetheart," he said, his tone mocking. "You've caused me a lot of trouble." Duke barked sharply, stepping forward until he was between them. "Call him off," Ray snapped. "You don't want to do this," Hannah said, voice shaking but steady. "Leave before someone gets hurt." He smirked. "Oh, someone's getting hurt, all right." Ray swung the bat downward, not at her, but near Duke, close enough to make the dog flinch and backstep slightly. The sound cracked through the diner, echoing against the walls. "You're brave now, huh?" he sneered. "Where's your hero?" Duke barked again, louder this time, his body tense and ready. Ray raised the bat once more, but before he could strike, the diner door burst open a second time, this time with purpose. Jack Hunter stood there, his silhouette framed by the cold night air. "He's right here," he said. Ray's grin faltered, then twisted back into a sneer. "You again," he said. "You think you scare me?" Jack stepped forward, calm and controlled. "No, but I think I stop you." He walked closer, boots crunching on the salt-strewn floor. "You're done, Mercer." "Am I?" Ray said, gripping the bat tighter. "You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not," Jack replied evenly, "but I only need to protect her tonight." The room went silent for a beat, then Ray charged. The swing came fast, wild with anger. Jack ducked it easily, moving with precision, grabbing Ray's arm and twisting just enough to make him drop the bat. It clattered to the floor again, spinning until it stopped at Duke's paws. The dog barked once, pushing it out of reach with a paw. Ray tried to shove Jack, but Jack's stance didn't move. "You're making this worse for yourself," Jack warned. "Walk away." But Ray didn't. He lunged again, fists swinging wildly, shouting curses that echoed off the empty walls. Jack stepped aside, letting him stumble past, then caught him by the back of the hoodie and turned him toward the door. "It's over." Ray's breathing was heavy now, his voice cracking between fury and panic. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Jack didn't answer. He just opened the door and nodded toward the snow. "Leave. Don't come back." Ray hesitated, his pride flickering for one last moment. "This isn't over," he spat. "It is," Jack said quietly, "because next time you won't have an audience." Ray stepped backward into the snow, glare fixed on Hannah before finally turning and disappearing into the storm. The bell above the door jingled faintly as it closed behind him. For a moment the world seemed to exhale. Hannah's hand shook as she knelt beside Duke, who wagged his tail once, then rested his head against her leg. "Good boy," she whispered, tears mixing with laughter in her voice. Jack picked up the bat, leaning it against the counter. "You need new locks," he said softly. She looked up at him, a small smile forming despite the fear still in her eyes. "Yeah," she said, "and maybe a new door too." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering Ray Mercer's fading footprints. Jack turned to glance through the window, making sure the road was clear. The night was quiet again, but he knew better than to trust the calm. Trouble might come back one day, but not tonight. Tonight the town slept safely under a fresh layer of snow, and the only sounds were the soft breathing of a tired waitress, the steady rhythm of her dog, and the watchful silence of a soldier who had seen too many storms to ever take peace for granted. The morning after the storm, the streets of Ash Creek glistened under a pale sky. The snow melted into quiet puddles along the roadside. The diner opened again at sunrise, its neon sign flickering back to life. Inside, Hannah Cole, the 20-year-old blonde waitress, wiped down the counter while Duke, her loyal German shepherd, rested nearby, his head raised as if he, too, was keeping an eye on the door. The events of the past few nights had changed everything, yet somehow life had settled into something peaceful again. The sheriff's deputies had come early that morning with news. Ray Mercer, the man in the black hoodie, had been found trying to leave the state. They arrested him quietly before dawn. For the first time in weeks, Hannah could exhale without glancing over her shoulder when Jack Hunter, the 37-year-old Navy SEAL, stepped through the door. The bell gave its usual chime, softer this time, as though even it understood that the worst was over. Hannah smiled as he took his seat by the window, his coat dusted with snow. She poured him a fresh cup of coffee without asking. "He's gone," she said, setting the cup down in front of him. Jack nodded, his expression unreadable but calm. "Sheriff told me," he said, "they'll keep him locked up for a while." "Long enough," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't think he'll come back after that." Jack leaned back, looking at Duke, who wagged his tail once. "You both handled yourselves better than most would have," he said. "That took courage." Hannah shook her head with a faint smile. "I just wanted to protect what's mine." "That's where courage starts," Jack said quietly. The diner filled gradually with regulars again, truckers, teachers, and small-town workers coming in for warmth and coffee. The tension that had once filled the room had lifted. The jukebox played softly, and sunlight streamed through the window, making the chrome counters gleam. Hannah moved between tables easily, her steps lighter now. Every so often she'd glance toward Jack's booth, and he'd give a small nod like a silent reassurance that everything was all right. Duke, now stretched near the door, would lift his head each time someone new entered, then relax when he saw familiar faces. It was a small routine, but it felt like safety. By afternoon, the sheriff himself stopped in for coffee. Sheriff Dwyer, the 50-year-old man with a stern face softened by years of duty, tipped his hat toward Hannah. "He's facing charges now," he said. "Won't be seeing daylight outside a cell for a long time." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said sincerely. He looked toward Jack. "Heard you were there when it happened. Again." Jack nodded slightly. "Just bad timing, or good, depending how you see it." The sheriff smiled faintly. "You ever think of staying here a while longer? This town could use someone like you." Jack chuckled. "I wasn't planning on it, but plans change." Dwyer nodded, understanding. "Well, if you do, you've got a place here." With that he left, his boots leaving faint marks in the melting snow outside. As the day went on, the town of Ash Creek began to breathe again. Word spread that justice had been done. People stopped by the diner, not just for coffee, but to congratulate Hannah, to pet Duke, to leave small notes of encouragement. One older couple even brought treats for the dog, laughing as Duke's tail thumped happily against the floor. Hannah felt her chest lighten with every passing hour. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living again. That night, after closing, she sat by the window with Jack and Duke, the three of them sharing a quiet peace that words couldn't fill. "You ever think about why you stop where you do?" she asked softly, watching the snow fall again outside. Jack smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Sometimes. I used to think I just moved on because I couldn't stay still. But maybe I stop where I'm supposed to." "And here?" she asked, curious. "Here feels right," he said simply. She didn't answer, but her smile said enough. Duke shifted closer, resting his head on her lap, content. The next morning, the diner opened to a sunrise so bright it turned the snow into gold. Hannah stood outside with a steaming mug of coffee, watching her breath mix with the cold air. Duke sat beside her, his ears flicking at every sound, but his posture calm. Across the street, Jack leaned against his truck, sipping from a paper cup. "Looks like the town's finally back to normal," she said. "Normal's good," he replied. "Means you did something right." "We did," she corrected, glancing down at Duke. "All of us." Jack smiled, then looked down the road where the last traces of winter wind blew through the pine trees. "I'll be heading out soon," he said after a moment. "New base, new work, but I'll check in." "You better," she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice softened. "Someone's got to keep Duke in line." The dog barked once as if to protest, making them both laugh. "Guess he'll miss you," she added. "He's not the only one." Jack smiled at that, then gave a small nod. "Take care of yourself, Hannah. You've got a good thing here," she nodded back. "Thanks to you." As he got into his truck, Hannah knelt beside Duke. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "Let's watch him off." The dog sat obediently, eyes following the truck as it pulled away. The road stretched out before it, endless and white beneath the morning sun. For a long time, Hannah stood there, her hand resting gently on Duke's neck, feeling his steady warmth. The air smelled of coffee and pine, clean and new. When the truck finally disappeared beyond the curve, she smiled faintly. Life, she realized, had a way of finding balance again. There would be more storms, more long nights, but for now, Ash Creek was still, safe, and whole. Inside, the bell above the diner door jingled again as the first customer of the day walked in. Hannah turned back, brushing her hands together. "All right, Duke," she said softly. "Let's get to work." The dog barked once and followed her in, his paws clicking against the tile. And as the door closed behind them, the morning light filled the room, wrapping everything in the quiet promise of peace, the kind earned not by fear, but by courage, loyalty, and the strength to stand when it mattered most. If this story of courage and quiet strength touched your heart, please share it so others remember that real bravery isn't loud, it's steady, loyal, and unshaken when the world turns dark. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor sacrifice, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between those who protect and those they protect. Which moment spoke to you most? Hannah's courage to stand her ground, Duke's unwavering loyalty, or Jack's calm resolve to do what's right? Let us know in the comments below. May this story remind you that even in a cruel world, kindness and courage still walk side by side. If you believe that goodness always finds its way back, write amen in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and may you always walk in light.